For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Thabi Madiba, researcher and analyst. Professor Raymond Suttner joins me to discuss whether Ubuntu is relevant to our future. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
What made you to write about Ubuntu?
You know, I have written on it before in academic journals, just in passing, when I've discussed Africanization and cultures and things like that. And I wanted to try to write in a way that people take Ubuntu seriously without falling into some traps. On the one hand, there is a tendency to romanticize Ubuntu and all aspects of African culture and to say, this is ours, I'm proud of it, that's how it is. And in some ways, some people think someone like myself who's a white shouldn't have anything to say about Ubuntu. But my belief is that all of us have a right to contribute to a discussion, provided we are respectful, provided we do the work, provided we argue logically. And if we don't argue logically, it's not a peculiarity of being white. People must show my arguments are not satisfactory. And there is a tendency to romanticize Ubuntu and say that because someone is an African, they have automatically got the quality of Ubuntu. It's ours. It's our. Let us deal with this in the Ubuntu way, as if it has an obvious meaning, which Africans know by virtue of being Africans. And the problem, however, is that a lot of companies use this word Ubuntu, and they've got nothing to do with human being as a human being because of other human beings. You've got Ubuntu Armed Response, you've got Ubuntu Financial Services, you've got Ubuntu Bikes, you've got Ubuntu Catering. If you've got to look in the telephone book, a whole lot of others. And the language of Ubuntu and social cohesion is used by some of these security companies. If you go to Parkview, for example, I remember seeing the one of these big 4x4s, but a militarized one, had written there, from the community, with the community, for the community, so that they paint themselves in the language of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is seen as something that is viewed as good by all. Now, personally, I do regard the proverb from which Ubuntu derives as being desirable, whether in a relationship with one's husband, wife, lover, whatever it happens to be, or with other people in the workplace, wherever. And I think it's important for us to try to advance Ubuntu, not in a romanticized way, but to advance the idea that we should care about one another, because that's, after all, what the freedom struggle was about, to end a society where the lives of people were destroyed and create one where we cared about one another and we did our best to help one another. Unfortunately, there's a lot of literature on Ubuntu which wants to use it for other reasons. For example, it's used in some business schools because if you get to talk about caring about one another and all of that, the idea is that workers should think it's very wrong to have a strike because they and the bosses both need to raise productivity, even if their wages are low. They're in a common enterprise. So there's a number of ways it can be used that can actually be quite reactionary. I'm not saying that all people who teach things like management philosophy have ideas like that in mind, but it can be used that way. So I think we mustn't give up on Ubuntu just because it is used by Armed Response as well as Archbishop Desmond Tutu. That doesn't negate its value. We need to give it a meaning and diffuse that meaning amongst all South Africans.
So why are you so concerned with whether or not Ubuntu is specifically an African concept and a philosophy?
Well, you see, when Professor Ramose and Dr. Broodryk suggest that it's not Western, it's completely different from Western humanism, and it's African, what they're really trying to do is to say that no insights from anywhere else are relevant to understanding Ubuntu. Now, if you look at the meaning of Ubuntu and the meaning of words like humanism, they're very similar. And it is nonsense to suggest that being an African means you automatically grow up with a sense of caring for one another. Today, Africans are growing up in terrible conditions in informal settlements. Do they think about Ubuntu? They're thinking about survival. And in those situations where there are not recreation facilities, where there's a lot of unemployment, a lot of atrocities have been occurring. Now, in some of the deep rural areas, they may be living in conditions similar to those when the original notion of Ubuntu derived, and maybe a lot of people do help one another with harvesting, burials, things like that. But even then, we must remember, it's not the only proverb. There are other proverbs. I quoted a proverb there that you first care for your own. See that they're getting food before you start concerning yourself about others. So that it's not contradictory, but it means something else. It's first you make sure of your own nest before you do it for others. As regards, so what I'm saying then is these are values that are found in a lot of other places. Certainly, people living in particular conditions are more likely to evolve proverbs that concern themselves for one another in order to weather adversity together, difficult climates and things like that. But it's not peculiar to Africa. Whether or not it's a philosophy, I think that people want to claim it's a philosophy in order to give it prestige. But a proverb is not a philosophy. You have to develop a philosophy. And this professor from Benin, Huntonji, argues there are philosophers in Africa, but there is no African philosophy. Like there are philosophers in Germany, but they don't have one German philosophy. Some of them are existentialists, some of them are phenomenologists, some of them are Marxists. The same goes for Africans. Because you're an African doesn't mean you have one philosophy.
Thank you, Professor. That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about whether Ubuntu is relevant to our future.